A major event has taken place here in Butler County within the last 3 or 4 weeks. A judge in the Butler County courts has been elevated to the district court, the federal court in Pittsburgh. A major event, the first time it's ever happened in the history of the Butler courts, or the federal court. Judge Marilyn Horan has served here in the Butler Court of Common Pleas for the last 22 years, and before that as an attorney in Butler for 17 years. So with us here in her courtroom number 4 in the Butler County Courthouse is Judge Marilyn Horan, and congratulations. You must be very excited.
It's an exciting time, Larry. Thank you. It is.
When did you first hear that it finally happened after all these years?
Well, it finally happened on September 6th when the Senate confirmed the nomination by President Trump.
Now, you were nominated earlier by President Obama, too, weren't you?
I was. I applied for this position. Judge Lancaster in the federal district court in Pittsburgh died, and his vacancy was created a position. So I applied for that in August of 2013.
Let's talk about that process. So it's not an anointment. You have to apply. How does the application process go?
Well, on the senator's website, our senators, which is Senator Toomey and Senator Casey, on their website is an application that can be completed. It is extremely extensive and requires a lot of work, and a lot of work product has to go into that to show my background, my experience, my judicial record, my lawyer record, and provide a lot of information. Once that application is filed, then the senators convene a committee, and it's usually about 30 or 40 people. They select people that are well informed in the legal world, the judicial world, business world, and each senator selects an equal number of committee members. And then I was interviewed by that committee in September or October of 2013.
So it's not a group of politicians judging it. These are other people besides those in public office. These are outsiders who are familiar with the judicial system?
Right. Our senators work together in a bipartisan fashion to try to identify and select the best candidates for the position.
Isn't it unusual for a Republican Senator Toomey and a Democratic Senator Casey to be on the same page like that?
They start each process in the beginning trying to be on the same page, and there are certain balances that are utilized when the ultimate nomination happens in terms of Republicans and Democrats, in terms of the nominees. But in this initial stage, when we're meeting with the committee on behalf of the senators, they are seeking people on that committee to interview candidates to really objectively look for the best qualified.
What kind of questions do they ask you?
Well, they have, each of the committee members has a full packet of the application process. So in that, they ask a lot of questions about cases I've decided or people I represented during my lawyer years. And it's not really the people, it's as much as the issues or the cases those people brought to the court. So they read my writings, they interviewed people, they talked with people about my background and my reputation in order to get a good handle on that. So when I was in there for the interview, they were asking me a lot of questions about decisions I've made as a judge.
Well, you made about 1,000 decisions as a judge. Could you remember all the things that they were asking you about?
The questionnaire asks the candidates to identify the 10 most significant cases where I was reversed by appellate courts, and other issues like where I've had to recuse myself in a case or not. All of those issues are in the application, so they could pretty much target cases that I could then respond to.
So there are a group of people sitting around, and you're in the center of the circle.
It's a large group.
Isn't it?
It wasn't easy, but
What were some of the most difficult questions?
You know, Larry, that was 5 years ago. But generally speaking, I think what the committee was looking at was in the one-on-one questioning, they were trying to discern my temperament, how I treated litigants, how I view my job as a judge. Different judges view their roles differently, and how a judge approaches a case will have a lot to do with how a judge decides a case. So they were asking me more questions on a philosophical level, on a temperament level, how I would deal with certain situations.
So they know about you. They must do some background checking. They must give that packet of information filled with information that's Marilyn Horan. How do they get that information? The application that I had to fill out was hundreds and hundreds of pages in length. It was very, very comprehensive. So you told everything you know about yourself?
Well, yes, in a way, but they're more, at that stage, that committee is more focused on legal talent, intellect, acumen in deciding cases, and in how I would perform as a judge on the bench.
So these are legal people rather than political people?
Predominantly, yes.
That's interesting, because obviously we sometimes wonder how political the justice system is in this country, but it's refreshing to see that it's mostly legal people asking legal questions. How long did that whole session take?
My interview was probably about 20 to 30 minutes long.
That's all?
That's it.
Did you get a feeling at what the result was?
At that point, you don't know.
Are they interviewing many other judge candidates?
There were a lot of candidates that everyone who applies, they interview. So there were a lot of interviews happening that day. My understanding is after those interviews, the committee gets together and decides the short list of candidates that they will relay to the senators.
So they have a short list of them in another interview process?
Well, then the interviewing happens directly with the senators. So then I was interviewed by Senator Toomey and his staff in Washington, D.C., and then subsequently by Senator Casey and his staff in Washington, D.C.
Were those two components similar? Did they ask you more or less the same questions on both sides of the aisle?
I think they did. I give our senators a lot of credit in that my perception of both of their interview sessions with me were really directed to finding quality in a candidate.
You know what occurs to me, Your Honor, is that the process is so thorough. What you're describing is a lot more than most of us would imagine, because most of us probably would imagine, at least I do, that it's mostly political. So it's cut and dried. If you're politically connected enough, you're going to get the job. But apparently that's not the case.
No. In my case, I've been on the bench for 22 years. I have no political connections in terms of power. As a judge, we are neutral. We don't get involved in politics. And before I became a judge, I had no political aspirations. So I'm a poster child for a non-political nominee rising to the bench.
Seems to me the only political component is you have to be elected as a judge, and that's, I suppose, in a sense, a political campaign.
In Pennsylvania, that is true. I was initially appointed because of judge retirements, but then I did run for election. But judges in Pennsylvania, common pleas judges in Pennsylvania, run on both tickets. So we don't, I mean, I have a party affiliation, but when we run for judge, we run both on the Republican and Democratic tickets.
Then after your term, there's a retention process.
Correct. And that is also as non-political as an election process can be.
Let's talk about your 1,000 or so cases that you've been involved with, because most people probably have hardly any relationship with the courts. They may have served on a jury. Mm-hmm. They may have had a friend who's been tried for some kind of a crime. And the only other maybe indication we have of what the system is about is programs like Law and Order. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about that. Is Law and Order a realistic depiction of what the court system is about?
I don't watch many of the court TV programs because I get enough of it in court. But the court system itself is very simple, it's simplistic, it's complicated if you don't know how to navigate it. But when someone comes into court, the court is supposed to be neutral. It doesn't matter who the litigants are. Everybody is entitled to get their fair day in court, and the judge's job is to keep that balance fulcrum even.
But you're a human being, and you have biases, as we all do. We like some things, we don't like some things. How do you prevent that from affecting the way you're handling that case?
Well, a lot of our judicial trainings are focused on helping us become aware of our biases and maybe leanings that we don't even realize we have. And there's just a lot of work goes into focusing judges on being fair and balanced and applying the law as it exists. Judges can't make up the law. Judges have to apply what has been legislated or what former judges in other decisions have decided in cases. So we have some pretty strict guidelines as judges that we have to follow to make sure it's a fair process.
You practiced law in Butler before you became a judge for 17 years, so you got to know a lot of the lawyers around town. Some became your friends, some were antagonists, I suppose. When they come before you in court, can you erase whatever background you might have had with any of these judges?
The lawyers? Oh,
the
yes.
lawyers.
Yes, absolutely. They understand my job, and I do my job as I need to do it, and it's not personal. And they understand that, and I have a very clear understanding of that. So if there's ever a time, if someone is coming before me that I feel I can't give everyone an equal shake, then I will do what is known as recusing and get off the case.
From my law and order experience, I get the feeling sometimes that one of the major concerns of a judge is not to have that case reversed by a higher court. Is that always on your mind when you're involved with a case?
No. My focus is on trying to do the right thing according to the law and what I have to do with the case. I give it the best study and decision and contemplation process I can, and I decide it to the best of my ability. I never worry if a case is appealed, because if a case is appealed, that's my safety net. If I make a mistake, then the appellate court can correct it. If they correct me, or they maybe decide the case differently than I do, but they win because they're the appellate court, I never worry if a case is appealed.
Other than the appeal process, which I think has to be initiated by one of the losing attorney, is there anybody else overlooking the court procedures, looking over your shoulder to make sure that you're doing it right?
Well, that appellate process deals with mistakes at law or mistakes in procedure. We have a judicial conduct board, and we have a Supreme Court. Those two aspects of our system also oversee that judges perform their jobs properly.
Does somebody have to blow the whistle to call them in on it?
They can call themselves in on it, but generally, if someone is concerned that a judge has done something unethical or against our rules, our code of conduct as judges, they can report it to the Judicial Conduct Board, and then the Conduct Board will investigate every one of those complaints.
You started as a judge 22 years ago. What have you learned?
Wow. That time flies really fast. As a judge, I think I've learned to appreciate and respect the process that we go through. I love jury trials. There are a lot of responsibility for a judge to manage, because the judge is sort of like the conductor of an orchestra. I'm responsible for the attorneys doing their job right. I'm responsible that the law gets explained to the jury properly. I have to make sure the courtroom is managed properly. There's a lot of balls up in the air with a trial that goes on, but juries are a wonderful resource that we have to giving us decisions.
Isn't it difficult to pick a jury? There are two lawyers, and I was called for jury duty one time. I was in the process of seeing how that worked, and it was amazing. That was the first time I'd ever been involved with that. It was solemn for me to see that this system seems to be a good one. Obviously, each lawyer, the defending lawyer and the prosecuting lawyer, the district attorney, have different goals. How do they come to an agreement on each juror?
Well, they don't always agree. We start with a larger panel and they make inquiries and questions. Now, if jurors have familiarity with the case or have a bias or some issue that would cause them to be not eligible as a juror, they can be excused. But then they have a panel that's left, and the way we end up with 12 is because the jurors are allowed, or the lawyers, each of them are allowed to exclude certain from that panel. So it's really not a matter of them agreeing on a specific juror. It's that once each of them strikes the ones they don't want, we're left with 12.
Now, is the jury selected solely by the two lawyers? Does the judge have any input on that at all?
In terms of the selection of the individual jurors, that's totally done by the lawyers. The judge, I participate in every jury selection, and the judge asks questions and tries to get at information that's relevant to finding neutral, fair, unbiased jurors.
The system is interesting, and it goes back to English times, I suppose, where the jury of peers is supposed to be able to decide whether somebody is guilty or not guilty. Why does the system work? Because you have people on the jury who are from different backgrounds, different educations, different ethnic backgrounds. How do they come together to make their choice?
Well, Larry, I've never been behind the door when they're deliberating, but I think that predominantly happens in the deliberation process. They've all heard the same thing come to them from the witness stand. They've seen the same evidence, and when they deliberate, they communicate with one another, and there's some give and take, and some people have to compromise on one point, and most times they come up with unanimous, pretty much unanimous decisions. I often say to my juries, we work with a jury panel of 12, and I often say to them after the fact that I send 12 jurors back into the jury room to deliberate a case, but 13 come out because it's the collective wisdom, and
the 13th person is the collective wisdom.
It is the collaboration that happens, and people see things differently, but they work it through. It's pretty fascinating to experience the process.
Judge Horan, you're stepping up into the next level, the federal level in Pittsburgh, the federal district court. Is the procedure down there very much the same as what it is at this local level in Butler?
Well, our jury system is pretty much similar. You know, cases, subject matter will be different. It's kind of more of a ramped up status, but I'm expecting it will be pretty similar, but I'll learn the nuances as I go.
Do you have to take some programs? Do you have to go to classes? Do you have to do anything to learn what that system is?
Well, yes, and there's a lot of books. I've already gotten boxes and boxes of books to start becoming familiar with what I'll need to know when I get down there. Fellow judges down there will be very helpful. And the federal judicial system, just as the state judicial system, has some education programming. There's several weeks, a couple weeks here and there that I'll be going away, learning aspects of the federal nuances. I already have been judging or doing judicial functions for 22 years. So some of the philosophy necessary for a judge to perform, I've already got down. It's really going to be, as I see it, the substance and the procedure and some of the cultural differences at the federal level that will be my new learning ground.
Is it mind-boggling for you to realize that some of the cases you'll be deciding at the federal level might end up in the Supreme Court?
Well, that's an interesting thought, but some of the cases I've dealt with here could have had that same path, but most of ours end up here in the state Supreme Court. But wherever they go, they go. I just do the job I need to do with the case when it's in front of me.
Is it a different perspective, though, to look at a federal case rather than a local case?
Well, you're applying different law, different procedures, but in the end of the day, a judge's job is pretty much the same, and that's to apply the law fairly, treat everyone fairly, and give it the best decision following the guidelines I have to follow.
You probably realize that you're going to have a lot of work ahead of you because it's not a full panel down there. I think there are about 4 judges short of the full stack.
Right. We are a complement of 10 commission judges in the Western District. That's for the whole western part of the state. We now have prior to confirmation, there were only 4 left. There were 6 vacancies. 2 have been confirmed, Judge Baxter in Erie and myself, which now brings us up to 6 sitting commission judges and 4 vacancies. There's 2 pending retirements within the next year, so we still need to get some replacements moved through the Senate.
Sounds like you could be a senior judge there in no time at all. Now, when it comes to meeting the judges, have you done that yet?
Yes, they've reached out to me along the process and along the way. At various points, they have reached out to me, and it's a wonderful, wonderful community of judges.
So they're all, in a sense, stars in their own right because of their backgrounds. They were selected for very specific, legitimate reasons, the same way that you were selected. Right. So that's rarefied air, isn't it?
Well, they're wonderful people. They really are, and they've been tremendously personable to me and professional, and I'm looking forward to working with them.
Let's go back to your hometown here in Butler, where we are right now in your courtroom. Other than being a judge and other than being a lawyer before that, you've really been involved with this community. You've had awards and citations from organizations. You've been officers on the board of directors and president of various organizations. Sounds like you've done a great deal outside of your job, and that seems unique.
Well, I don't know that it's unique. It's part of being a member of my community. And when you see a need and there's some way that you can help or lend your talents, then for me it was a very natural thing to become involved.
When you were a lawyer with one of the prestigious law firms in Butler, you became a partner in that law firm. Let's go back before that. Mm-hmm. When you were in high school or college, when did you decide that you wanted to be a lawyer? Well,
I didn't until I was in college. When I was in high school, at some of the career day events, if you remember him, Vargo, the umpire.
Eddie Vargo.
Eddie Vargo spoke. He was also a probation officer, and he spoke at my 9th grade class about probation work, and I thought that was something that was very interesting to me. So when I went to college, I went for that at Penn State, and the law courses were incredibly interesting to me. And so I decided I would go to law school, and that's how it happened.
Was law school much more difficult than college?
It was different. It was much more intellectually challenging, and it was, they used much more of the syncretic method back then, so a lot of days you were on the hot seat when you were in class, and that I found difficult because they were in your face and challenging you to think fast, think on your feet, and perform.
I've been told by some lawyers that going to law school is a unique experience because you're learning to think a different way than most people think. Explain that.
That is exactly right. It's analysis. It's how you think and how you problem solve and how you process information that comes in. It is a very different way of thinking. And in the beginning it's hard, but once you get it, it goes real smooth.
I understand, I hear what you're saying, but I'm not sure I understand what the difference is. How do you think differently than I do?
Well, Larry, I don't know. My husband would love to know the way I think. It's a processing method. It's seeing things in certain ways. And I often tell my children, I think in outlines, thinking about processing things, information that you're getting in and how you will process it. And then you have to apply the law to it. It's not easy.
Did you find it difficult after law school adjusting to being a lawyer?
No, it was very smooth. I've worked with great partners, Jim Taylor, Virginia Murrin, Charlie Flock, wonderful partners, and they did a great job mentoring me and helping me along.
So after 17 years then you decided that maybe you wanted to be a judge?
Well, that's where my life took me. I was very happy. I had the best partners and best clients you could have had, but sometimes life calls you in different directions, and that's how I felt at the time, and I never looked back.
Does a judge have to be a lawyer?
At this level, yes. Yes. At the common pleas level, and at the federal level, yes. Yes.
What do you think you've learned most about yourself and your profession being a judge here for 22 years?
Well, what have I learned the most about myself? I think I'm pretty much steady as you go. No matter what happens in my professional life, what happens in my personal life, I have developed a philosophy of peacefulness and calmness. Nothing rattles me too much.
Some people can't talk themselves into that.
Well, I'm very lucky. Everything is going to work out no matter what happens. And I've had ups and downs in my personal life and also in my work life. But whatever comes in front of you or whatever comes in front of me, I have a strong sense of confidence that we'll work it out. We'll find a solution.
Senators Toomey and Senator Casey both nominated you?
They did.
And both promoted you into this position, and then, of course, the President has signed the confirmation of all this. Do they, will they contact you? Will they be in touch with you to see how you're doing, or doesn't it work that way?
They've been incredibly supportive throughout this whole process, and it has really been a good source of comfort that they have been so supportive. They want us to do a good job. They want me to do a good job. They're not going to be involved with how I do my job once I'm there. I'm very comfortable and confident that both of them sought to get the best person for the position there, and they're happy to let me do my job.
Are there some rules at the federal level that are different from the rules at this level here in the county?
There are different procedural rules in this court and in that court, and judges ethically have rules that they have to follow. Those ethical rules are pretty much similar.
Judge Horan, we're so proud of you. And the fact that you're the first judge from Butler County ever to reach the federal judgeship level in Western Pennsylvania, the first person to do that, whether they're a judge or not. And we wish you a great deal of luck, and I know I can see it in your eyes that you're looking forward to it and probably wondering what it's really like. So congratulations, Judge Horan, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Judge Marilyn Horan from the Butler courts for the last 22 years, just elevated to the U.S. District Court of Western Pennsylvania. I'm Larry Berg. We'll see you next time on Faces and Places.